Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner, and in today's edition, I want to talk about the GCN commentators and the network in whole. You guys are like, oh man, Chris is going to go to town. I am pretty much going to go to town on a bunch of knuckleheads over here, and I want to just give you guys a little bit of facts of some of the videos I'm watching. Now, first off, 3-4 years ago, a long time ago when GCN Network first started, they brought out some crazy article talking about how the speed of the professional peloton in Europe was really only that high because they had a caravan in front of the peloton. And then they gave all kinds of data about how the cars were pulling the peloton along and all that stuff. And that's why we have seen the speed so high in the professional peloton and why you guys can't do that stuff at home. That was my first real experience. Before that, I really hadn't paid attention. The internet was catching on. With bike races were starting to flow through. It wasn't just Saturday morning on NBC with a bunch of wine coverage and 1 hour of 10 stages of the Tour de France, but 30 minutes of that was wine coverage and 15 minutes was commercial, and you had about 5 minutes of what actually happened. And nowadays, when you're talking about bike racing, you can turn on the GCN network, which I have to applaud. They do an amazing job of covering an insane amount of bike races. So that's why I'm always going there, is because of the amount of coverage that they have there. But it's not necessarily for the intense, high quality of this is how you race your bike, this is what's going on in the race, this is why you're coming to watch us. It's more that they're commercial free. The viewing is spectacular because you can watch every race throughout the season, all the big ones and a lot of the smaller semi-classics. So you guys know my gripe when I'm talking about the Basque Country and on that last stage with Jumbo-Visma letting that massive size group go up the road. And I was very unhappy with that when the GCN commentators were talking about, hey, this is a perfect move. They don't have to do anything, even though Jonas Vingegaard is completely isolated back there in a group of like 30 guys. So if he flat, if he crashed or something like that, it could be a nightmare. They're talking about how Bahrain Victorious has to chase because they don't have anybody in that front group. Well, they do have to chase if they want to be second, but they don't chase if they want any shot at all at the win, because you don't want to pull Jonas Vingegaard all the way to the last big Category 1 Arate climb if you hope to win and beat the Jumbo-Visma superstar Jonas Vingegaard, who's fourth best rider in the world, maybe third best, maybe there with Remco Evenepoel, whatever you want to call. I won't argue that. But now you go and you watch World of Cycling and you watch Dan Lloyd talk about how the SD Works with Lotto Kopecky allow an 18-rider group to go up the road when they have the 50-star favorite in Lotto Kopecky to win the race. Well, the two scenarios are about the same, right, Dan Lloyd? I mean, we're talking about the Basque Country letting 13 riders go up the road, 14, 15 riders. We're talking about Paris-Roubaix with a big-time favorite, Lotto Kopecky, 50-star favorite. Your words, not mine. Jonas Vingegaard, 50-star favorite. My words, not anybody else's at the Basque Country. But when you compare the two, they're almost identical. So this is what I'm talking about, where the strategies always flip-flop all the time with the GCN commentators, and they're all over the place with, well, they don't have to chase because Bahrain Victorious has to chase at the Basque Country. Well, they have to chase here at Paris-Roubaix, even though they have one rider, Marcus, in that front group of 18 riders. But I'm telling you, as a pro for 25 years, if you're one rider in a group of 18, it's very hard to control 18 girls, so 17 other ones attacking you all the time, put yourself in the right position all the time, and then hope you're still good enough to win for SD Works when you have a 50-star favorite, Dan Lloyd's words, not mine, in the back of the group, which is what they should have done. SD Works should have went to the front, controlled it all the way into the final few cobblestone sections, and let Lotto Kopecky just go to work, or let her bring her straight into the sprint and let her win the sprint. Whichever scenario you're capable of doing is a fantastic way to play it for SD Works, even though their director sportif was a big-time knucklehead for allowing 18 riders to go up the road. Now, when I'm watching World of Cycling, and we back it up about a month ago, this Dan Lloyd up there again, and we're talking about the UAE Tour. They're going into the last corner, stage 1, and it's there, Mark Cavendish flying into the last corner. And on the outside here, you have one Bahrain Victorious rider, Nicholas Arndt, I believe it was, and he's coming into the inside, his handlebars, slightly over the handlebars of Mark Cavendish, and he's coming into that inside turn because he wants to take the wheel away from Cavendish and get onto Caleb Ewan's wheel so they can start the sprint. In that edition of World of Cycling, Dan Lloyd says, I don't know what Mark Cavendish was thinking in this last turn, leaving the sprinters in front, the two best sprinters in the world in front, and going back to Case Bowl to have Case Bowl lead him out. Well, Dan Lloyd, Mark Cavendish did not leave the two sprinters' wheels there. What's happened is Nicholas Arndt's coming over the top, going into the turn, and Mark Cavendish's handlebars are behind him, so he knows he's going to lose the battle. And this is the first race of the season at the UAE Tour, so there's no reason Mark Cavendish wants to risk fighting in for this stage at the UAE Tour, fighting with the Bahrain Victorious rider when he can just back off. There's no way he could go up there and hold the wheel up there of the two sprinters of Caleb Ewan in front. So Dan Lloyd's details there of what Mark Cavendish was doing when he said, I don't understand what Mark Cavendish was thinking at this moment. He's completely wrong. What he's thinking is, I don't need to crash in stage 1 of the beginning of the season. When I want to break the Eddie Merckx record at the Tour de France, I'm going to back off a little bit. I'll lose today's stage because I already lost it coming into this turn here, being behind Caleb Ewan, who's behind the Soudal Quick-Step train up front. He was going to lose anyway, so why bother crashing? That's what really happened. Now we fast forward again, go up to World of Cycling that they just put up a couple days ago, and they're talking about the crash between John Degenkolb, DSM, Mathieu van der Poel, and Jasper Philipsen. And they're talking about how everyone was up in arms and thought that possibly Mathieu van der Poel should have been suspended or DQ'd from the race or something like that, and how it was possibly two riders' fault that was causing this crash. I'm here to tell you exactly what was happening. First off, Jasper Philipsen's in first position. Mathieu van der Poel's in second on the center. John Degenkolb has moved over to the grass, to the smooth dirt section, and now he can see Mathieu van der Poel and Jasper Philipsen. John Degenkolb, I can almost 100% tell you, he is looking there at Mathieu van der Poel getting ready to start his attack, and he's trying to beat Mathieu van der Poel or go along with the Alpecin de Koenig rider with his attack. The only problem is when you're looking at this scenario, John Degenkolb, who's the only person that can see everybody. He can see Mathieu van der Poel because he's in front of him, and he can see Jasper Philipsen because he's in front of him. So when he can see that Mathieu van der Poel is starting his attack and he's going to split and come to the right side to take the dirt road away from John Degenkolb, Degenkolb's trying to accelerate. Once he's accelerating, they're filling the gap, right? Okay, John Degenkolb is at fault for this crash because as he's accelerating, he's the only one that can see everything. I can probably guarantee you that Mathieu van der Poel can see John Degenkolb there, and they're racing for that open hole in the dirt there to get around Jasper Philipsen. I can't 100%, but I can 100% tell you that John Degenkolb can definitely see the two riders in front of him, so he's at fault. But just in case, we'll call it fair and we'll say Mathieu van der Poel can see John Degenkolb. John Degenkolb can see everyone else, and they're sprinting for the dirt road there, trying to get ahead of each other, but they're filling in the gap. Then Jasper Philipsen, of course, moves over to the right, and that for sure causes the crash. But either way, the scenario here, when we're talking about Paris-Roubaix crash, if John Degenkolb comes up and he can see that as he's filling in, if he does beat Mathieu van der Poel, Mathieu van der Poel is going to fill in that gap, and they're going to go 3 wide on half of a dirt road and half of a cobblestone road, which is going to cause problems. So John Degenkolb should have known to just back off, let Mathieu van der Poel go in that spot, and then follow Mathieu van der Poel through, because even if he does beat him, Mathieu van der Poel would come in and he probably would end up bunching up and hitting Jasper Philipsen or John Degenkolb, even if Jasper Philipsen doesn't move over. Now, we know Jasper Philipsen does move over, but I can tell you from experience, when you're on the cobblestones, especially with the fans, especially with the noise of the bikes and the cobblestones bouncing all over, you do not know exactly what's happening behind you, but you could get a sense of feeling that you're starting to slow down on the cobblestones. You're seeing the dirt road like Jasper Philipsen is, so he's going to move right. Nobody on the cobblestones looks around, takes their time before they come off the cobblestone on the dirt road. It doesn't happen. When it's really aggressive racing, when the real attacks are coming, you can't take your eyes off of what's happening in front of you on the cobblestones, because when you look back, your bike is still bouncing around like this. So no one does that. Does it happen from time to time? Of course. When the race is calm, do they look? Of course. Do they still have a feel of what's happening behind them? Of course, Jasper Philipsen would have felt the pressure of the speed start to drop a little bit, and he's thinking, I got to get to that dirt road as fast as I can. He's not thinking, I need to cut off my own teammate, Mathieu van der Poel, who's trying to attack right now. That's not what he's thinking. He had done that just a little bit earlier, and I'm sure he wasn't thinking about doing it a second time here on Care 4. So when you break down this tactic, it's really John Degenkolb who had the best view of the action that was happening, and he was aggressively trying to shoot ahead of Mathieu van der Poel as all three riders pulled over. They hit. He caught the flagpole there on the right side of the road, and that's why we saw his bike flip out from underneath him and a spectacular crash. Now, of course, the commentators and myself in general shed a tear there for John Degenkolb because we didn't get to see the big battle at the end. Now, the GCN commentators go, wow, it was such a shame because he had such good form. I don't shed a tear for John Degenkolb because he had such good form. I shed a tear because he had such good form and we're at Paris-Roubaix and could have saw a great battle. But if John Degenkolb wants to find this form again, man, the DSM rider just has to most likely mirror the same kind of training he did, the effort, the big time training, the big time rest, recovery, the sacrifices of not going out and partying with your friends and all that stuff, and he'll find that same form again. There's really rare, with the exception of injuries and with health issues, that you can't find the same form that you've had in the past at points and times throughout your career. And it's been a long time for John Degenkolb since he showed that kind of form that we saw at this year's 2023 Paris-Roubaix. But he's a big boy. He should be able to find it again, with the exception, I'm aware of the car accident that he had many years back that everyone says has affected his form. And that could be the case. If that's the case, I shed a tear for John Degenkolb because I have had health issues that caused my career to end. And there was times when you did have good form for some unknown reason. All the stars aligned up and you finally had good form like we saw with John Degenkolb. But if it's not health, if he doesn't have a health issue, if he doesn't have some kind of injury throughout from that car crash that we're talking about years ago, John Degenkolb should be able to just mirror his training and come back to this same kind of fitness that we saw at Paris-Roubaix again. So I don't shed a tear for the big guy not being able to find his form again. I shed a tear because we lost out on a spectacular final at this year's Paris-Roubaix. Now, one other thing I want to bring up on the GC commentators' world of cycling, when they're talking about what the outcome would have been between Mathieu van der Poel and Wout van Aert if Wout van Aert had not flatted just moments after that crash from John Degenkolb. Now, we saw him go into the left turn. He went in with some pretty good speed, and then immediately after that, the tire he knows flat. Mathieu van der Poel catches him, and then Mathieu van der Poel, of course, dislodges him by the end of the Care 4, and he's going solo in the finish. On the GCN World of Cycling, these three guys are giving you the scenario of what would have happened, and they're talking about how Wout van Aert was scared to basically work even with Mathieu van der Poel. Hannes talks about many reasons about how he hadn't been doing any kind of work and he'd been sitting on, and she gives excuses such as at Tour of Flanders when he got beat by Mads Pedersen. That doesn't count, Hannah, because getting beat for third is not like getting beat for first. And if you go back to the race before that, E3 Saxo Bank, Wout van Aert destroyed everybody in the sprint, and we're talking Mathieu van der Poel and Tadej Pogacar. Now, let's go back into the topic where they're talking about Wout being scared, and why I'm here to tell you he wasn't scared. First off, Jumbo-Visma was the one who made this selection before Section 20 and then carried it through the forest. Then, of course, we know Christophe Laporte flatted, and Albacine de Koenig had Jasper Philipsen and Gianni Vermeersch bridge up to this group, and now they were 3 against 1 Jumbo-Visma rider, Wout van Aert. So now the reason why Wout van Aert, who tactically is making an intelligent move, I don't know if it's the directors in the car, I don't know if it's Wout, but whatever's happening at this moment, every move that we're watching from Wout van Aert tactically is perfect. It's not being done because he's scared to go to the line one-on-one against Mathieu van der Poel. What he's worried about, if Mathieu van der Poel attacks and he goes up the road, what's happening behind? Okay, is Jasper Philipsen behind getting a free draft? Remember, Jasper Philipsen's one of the fastest sprinters in the world and highly coming up to being my #1 sprinter in the world up on the Butterfly Effect in my channel here when we're talking about Jasper Philipsen. Not quite there, but he's very, very close. But all we know right now at Paris-Roubaix, Jasper Philipsen looks exceptionally good. So if Wout van Aert's up there with Mathieu van der Poel doing hard pulls, let's say they get caught from the back while Jasper Philipsen's been sitting on getting a free ride. Like, guys, I'm not going to do anything. Matthew Vanderpool's up there. I don't have to do anything. This group back here with Stefan Kuhn, Filippo Ganna, John Degenkolb, who was back there still and still hadn't crashed. And we're talking about Jasper Philipsen in there. If Jasper Philipsen's getting a free ride for 20, 30, 40 kilometers, whatever it is, from that climb when Matthew Vanderpool put in that big acceleration, and Wout van Aert's the only one able to follow, but he's not willing to really pull even with Matthew Vanderpool. Let's say that Jasper Philipsen's getting a free ride back there. They catch with 10K, 5K, or they catch right on the velodrome, and now Wout van Aert's got to beat a Jasper Philipsen. What he's got to worry about and why you're not seeing even pulls is he's outnumbered. And the other big thing, he's got Nathan Van Hooydonk back there chasing and Christophe Laporte at 1 minute to 2 minutes back there, but at times close enough to where if he could get this group to slow down, he's going to have his two teammates up there. Now the odds are going to flip. Now he can go one-on-one with anybody he wants because he's got a Christophe Laporte that can cover moves. Or if other guys attack, he has a Christophe Laporte and Nathan Van Hooydonk that can pull that move back. So Wout was not just sitting on afraid to sprint against Matthew Vanderpool. At no point in time is Wout van Aert worried about going into the velodrome and sprinting against Matthew Vanderpool. Sure, Matthew Vanderpool has a shot at winning against Wout van Aert. I would call it even odds, and maybe even if you ask me, I would push it to Wout van Aert being the outright better sprinter of the two coming into a finish at Paris-Roubaix. But, of course, when you look at the classic resume, Matthew Vanderpool did win Paris-Roubaix. He did win Milan-San Remo this year. So maybe I'm wrong up here, but when you're looking at the GCN commentators, I'm telling you guys, they're just a little bit off on everything they're telling you. So you can only believe about 50% of it. The rest is all up for argument. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next edition real soon.